The day they tried to erase me from the company I built with my own two hands. That was the day they handed me the keys to bring it all crashing down. You see, they thought experience was old news. They were wrong. And boy, did they find out the hard way. Hey there, friends. I'm Frank Dawson, 68 years old, and after more than 40 years in the manufacturing game, I've seen just about everything. This is the story of how a quiet man who kept his head down and did the work got pushed. Aside for the boss's kid, until one old folder full of papers turned the tables. If you've ever felt invisible after giving your best years to a job, this one's for you. Let's get into it. It was a Tuesday morning in early fall, the kind of crisp day when the leaves start turning gold outside the factory windows in Toledo, Ohio. I got to the plant a little before 6, same as always. Coffee in my thermos, lunch pail on the passenger seat, radio tuned low to the oldies station, maybe some Johnny Cash or Elvis. The songs that still feel like home. 42 years at Apex Precision, starting when it was just a small shop making parts for farm equipment back in the late 70s. Back then, manufacturing was king in the Midwest. Good jobs, steady pay, the kind that let a man buy a house, raise a family, and retire with a little dignity. And I walked the floor every morning in those early days. Checked the presses, listened to the machines breathe like old friends, made sure nothing was about to quit on us. That habit never left me. Even after the company grew into something bigger, with investors and fancy titles. I sat down at my desk in the engineering corner, fired up the computer, and there it was waiting in my inbox like a birthday card nobody asked for. Employee spotlight. Congratulations, Ethan Caldwell. Bright blue banner. Confetti graphic raining down the screen. Big photo of Ethan, 29, big smile, arms crossed like he just won the lottery, standing in front of the main control station. The same control station I designed, wired, tested, and babysat through 3 major upgrades over the decades. They'd blurred the whiteboard behind him just enough so nobody could read my handwriting on the logic diagrams. Nice touch. The write-up said he was now Director of Next Generation Automation, a title they created special for him. 3 weeks earlier, he'd stood in a full engineering review meeting and asked, in front of the whole team, what a PLC actually controlled in the line sequence. The room went quiet as folks shifted in their seats. I explained it patiently, slow and clear, no attitude. Drawing on years of troubleshooting those very systems during midnight shifts when the line went down and orders piled up. He nodded like he understood, then changed the subject to agile scaling and digital transformation. Words that sounded fancy but meant little to the guys turning wrenches. Now he was directing the future. Nobody mentioned my name. Not once. Not even a thanks to the veterans who laid the foundation. Just Ethan. Ethan and his LinkedIn followers. Ethan and his father's last name. Richard Caldwell, the CEO who'd bought in big with private equity money about a decade back. Richard was a smooth talker from Chicago, the kind who wore expensive suits and talked about synergies while cutting corners on safety gear. I'd seen the company change under him. More focus on stock prices, less on the people who made it run. But this felt personal. I sat there a long minute, coffee getting cold in my hand. D already patched a sensor glitch at 5:30 that morning, the kind that could have stopped the whole assembly line for half a shift and cost thousands in downtime. I'd rewritten the safety interlock code last month so we could pass the insurance audit without a hitch. I'd saved the company north of $200,000 last year with a simple reroute of the coolant system, something I figured out during a slow weekend shift while thinking about my grandkids. But that morning, none of it existed in their eyes. I was just the old guy in the corner, the one they called when things broke, but forgot when the praise got handed out. I closed the email, took a slow breath, then I did what I've always done. I went back to work, checked the production logs, approved a parts order, even helped a young mechanic troubleshoot a noisy conveyor belt. But something shifted inside me that day. Not a raging fire, not yet. More like a quiet click, the sound an old lock makes when the key finally finds the right spot. After years of rust, I'd given this place my prime years, missed family dinners, worked through back pain that still flares up on rainy days, watched friends retire early with health issues from the grind. And for what? To be airbrushed out like some footnote in a history book nobody reads. That night after supper, when the house got still and my wife Ellen was already asleep upstairs, I went down to the basement. The air down there smelled like old wood and faint oil, reminders of projects from years gone by. I pulled an old metal filing box from the bottom shelf behind some Christmas decorations, the kind you buy at the hardware store for 20 bucks, sturdy and unassuming. Label on the front in black marker. Frank. Personal, PRE Incorporation. I hadn't opened it in ages, but something told me it was time. Inside were the originals, that hand-drawn schematics from 2017, yellowed at the edges from time. Early code printouts with my notes scribbled in the margins. Things like adjust timing loop for efficiency or test underload. Email threads with the first investor, timestamped before Richard Caldwell ever wrote his first check or Ethan was even out of high school. And right on top, the one page that mattered most, my provisional patent filing, core modular control architecture, filed under my name alone, never assigned to the company, because nobody ever asked. Back then, it was just me taking precautions. Paranoia from too many stories of guys like me getting pushed out after building empires for others that I'd heard them at union halls and over beers at the local VFW. Hardworking men left with nothing but regrets that I figured better safe than sorry. Turns out, sorry was exactly what they were going to get. That I sat there in the dim light of the basement bulb, flipping through those papers, memories flooding back like the Maumee River after a storm. The winter of 2017 had been brutal, record snows, power outages. Ellen was worried about the bills piling up. Our youngest was in college studying engineering, following in my footsteps. That I'd come home from my day job at a local parts supplier, eat a quick supper of whatever was left over, then head to the garage. Heater barely working against the cold, fingers numb on the keyboard, but I kept typing, line by line of code. Testing on a little prototype rig I built from scrap parts scavenged from junkyards. By spring, it was running smooth enough to show a couple of local investors over coffee at a diner downtown. That's when Richard came in with his big city money and promises of growth. I was just happy someone believed in what I'd created. Handshakes all around. No lawyers involved yet. Who thinks about fine print when you're finally seeing a dream take shape after years of grinding? I closed the box, slid it back on the shelf, but took a copy of the patent filing upstairs with me. Tucked it into my nightstand drawer next to my reading glasses and a photo of Ellen and me from our wedding day in 80-2 to AS. I lay in bed listening to the house creak in the wind. I felt that click again. The next few weeks were going to be like watching a familiar play unfold. Only this time I was in the audience instead of on stage, and I had a front row seat to what came next. The office started feeling different after that. Whispers in the break room about restructuring. Younger folks excited about Ethan's vision workshops, where they'd stick notes on walls and talk big ideas that rarely made it to the floor. That I stopped going. They didn't notice. Then came the reassignments. Sarah from HR called me in one afternoon just before Thanksgiving. She was a nice enough gal, young, polite, probably fresh out of some business school, clearly reading from a script. Frank, we're reorganizing a bit to align with growth. That we'd like you to focus on documentation and legacy support. Legacy support? That's what they call it when they want you out of sight. I nodded, smiled, said I understood. Then I went home and started a new folder on my personal drive. Every email, every changelog, every time Ethan cut and pasted my specs into his shiny presentations. That I saved screenshots. That I saved versions. That I saved the truth. Because the longer you stay in this game, the more you learn one simple rule. The loudest voice in the room doesn't always win. The one with the receipts does. And mine had been waiting, patient as an old hound, for more than 20 years. The weeks after that spotlight email felt like walking through fog. Everything looked the same on the surface. The hum of the machines, the smell of cutting oil, the coffee pot that always ran out by 10. But underneath, things were shifting. Ethan started holding what he called innovation huddles. Every Thursday afternoon in the big glass conference room, he'd have colored sticky notes all over the walls, talking about blue sky thinking and paradigm shifts. The younger engineers went because they figured it looked good on their reviews. The old-timers like me, we found reasons to be on the floor. That I wasn't invited anymore to the real meetings. The ones where they talked about the new funding round and the big product launch they were planning. That I'd walk past the door and catch glimpses. Ethan up front with his laptop, my old diagrams projected on the screen, his voice full of confidence he hadn't earned. One afternoon, I heard him telling a group of investors over speakerphone. This modular control system is the heart of our next-generation platform. Revolutionary scalability. Revolutionary. I'd written that code on weekends when my back ached and my eyes burned. Now it was just part of his pitch deck. Sarah from HR called me in again around Thanksgiving time. Same office, same polite smile. Frank, we're making some adjustments to better align roles with the company's growth stage. Translation. They were moving me further into the shadows. She handed me a new job description, mostly knowledge transfer and archiving historical documentation. In other words, clean up your old stuff so the new kid can take credit without tripping over your name. I took the paper, folded it once, and put it in my pocket. Thank you, Sarah. I'll get right on that. She looked relieved. She shouldn't have been. That same evening, After the parking lot emptied out, I stayed late. Not unusual. Folks were used to seeing my truck there after hours. I went down to the server room in the basement. Cool air, steady hum of fans, the smell of dust and electricity. That room hadn't changed much in 20 years. Still the same racks I'd helped install when we moved into this building. My badge still worked on the door. No cameras down there. Budget never stretched that far. I found the backup drive labeled in my own handwriting from way back. Frank, core backup, do not erase. Somebody had moved it to the bottom shelf. A thin layer of dust on top. I pulled it out, plugged in my own encrypted drive, and got to work. Methodical, quiet, precise. Early code, original architecture, communications from before incorporation. I wasn't downloading company data. I was reclaiming my own work. Years of it, buried under layers of team collaboration and revisionist history. While the files transferred, I sat cross-legged on the concrete floor and remembered. October 14th, 2017, 1 in the morning. My kitchen smelled like burnt ramen. The space heater under my desk kept shorting out the circuit. I'd just come back from my day job. Couldn't sleep. I cracked open my laptop and started writing code. The first line became the first function, then a prototype, then a fragile little system that did something no one else in our space had done yet. It worked reliably, efficiently, on outdated hardware and spotty networks. That was the night the idea was born, though we didn't know it then. Back when it was just me, duct tape, a ThinkPad, and a dream I didn't even have the energy to name, I'd emailed a few colleagues that night with the subject line, "Finally cracked it." Attached was a zipped folder and a warning, "Be gentle. Still has bugs." I'd built it all before a single NDA was signed, before a single founder's agreement was drafted, before any of the Caldwells had so much as bought a whiteboard. The idea, the architecture, the executable files, mine, and I had proof. The transfer finished. I unplugged, put everything back, and walked out. A relic, a weapon. At the T-home, I opened my inbox and typed a phrase I hadn't searched in years. Provisional filing US 82XX. There it was, dated and sealed. A quiet little email from the USPTO confirming my ownership of the system architecture, the core logic, the very soul of the product they now called revolutionary, filed under my name, not the company's. Mine. I stared at that line of text, my lips curling into the first real smile I'd allowed myself in weeks. IT wasn't just pride. IT was justice in slow motion. The calendar invite hit my inbox at 7:13 in the morning. Subject, leadership alignment discussion. Frank Dawson. No context, no prep docs, just a 30-minute block sandwich between Ethan's innovation recap and some all-hands nobody ever paid attention to. I knew what it was, the final meeting. The one where they tell you how much they appreciate your service while security waits outside the door. I printed exactly one page that morning. The patent filing. Slipped it into a manila folder. Put on the same navy blazer I wore the day we landed our first major client. Kissed Ellen goodbye. Drove to the plant. The conference room energy was off. Too polished, too pre-coordinated, the kind of silence that only comes from rehearsed betrayal. Richard greeted me with a smile, so tight, it looked like it had been surgically attached. The other board members offered nods. Ethan was there, in some limited edition sneakers that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. "Frank," Richard began, clasping his hands like a priest about to deliver last rites. "Thanks for joining on short notice. Wanted to have a quick conversation about company direction." I sat down, opened my notebook, pen ready, pretending I was taking notes. Richard cleared his throat. "As you know, we're heading into a crucial growth phase. And with that comes necessary adjustments in leadership alignment. We've been doing some thinking about organizational structure, specifically around roles that support versus drive innovation." Ethan nodded solemnly. The kid thought he was being respectful. "Your contributions have been solid," Richard continued. "But frankly, your approach is a little too old school for a company moving into the digital transformation space." There it was, word for word, like someone had dared him to say it out loud in 2025. Too old school. I didn't blink. Didn't laugh. I didn't flip the table, though I thought about it. Instead, I reached into my bag, pulled out the folder, and slid the single page across the table. Richard blinked, surprised. "So you understand?" "I understand perfectly," I said, voice level. "Good luck with the transformation." I stood point one, breath point two. I turned to leave, and no one stopped me. But before I walked out of that conference room for the last time, I took a little detour. Back to my desk. Point one, shared drive archive had been left untouched in the chaos. They assumed it was just legacy documentation. They always assumed that I didn't delete it, that would set off alerts. I just tweaked permissions, just emanually to make it inaccessible to everyone but me. Logged the change manually to avoid triggering automated systems.no. Flags.no emails. Just silence. Then I shut my laptop, picked up the photo on my desk, me and the original team back, when we were all broke and hopeful, and slipped it into my bag. Left everything else on the elevator ride down. My heart pounded like a war drum. Not from fear. Not even from rage. From restraint that I could already feel the fire in my chest being replaced by something colder, sharper, something surgical, because they thought the conference room was the end of the story, that I'd walk out like some bitter ghost, forgotten by next quarter's numbers. What they didn't know was that was just the prologue point. 3 days after they escorted me out, legal finally noticed I was gone. The email came in plain text, no pleasantries, no call to check in, not even a fake HR best of luck on your next journey. Just a block of cold corporate speak from a junior counsel I'd never met. Frank, per your offboarding, please confirm in writing that all proprietary assets, equipment, and intellectual property belonging to Apex Precision have been returned or destroyed. I read it twice. Once as the old Frank who might have still cared. Then again, as the new Frank, the one forged in their dismissals, in their theft of my work, in their smug certainty that I'd fade into silence. I hit reply. Assets not owned by you have not been returned. That was it.no attachments, no explanations, just enough to make someone in legal sweat through their button-up if they actually read it. But they didn't reply. Not that day. Not the next. Silence, like they were hoping I'd go away if they just stopped making eye contact. Classic corporate tactic. Pretend ambiguity is consent. So I leaned into the ambiguity that I let the silence spread like a stain. Meanwhile, I got to work. I pulled up the LinkedIn page for our lead investor, Kenneth Hale, partner at Hale Capital Partners, known for his data-driven diligence and quiet interest in IP ownership. Translation: the kind of man who would shake your hand and gut your valuation in the same meeting if your paperwork stank. We'd spoken once, years ago, during our seed round. That he remembered me, not because I was loud, but because I asked the one question his team didn't expect. How does your firm handle IP recovery when a founder exits unplanned? His eyebrows had gone up. He'd smiled, slow and curious. You speak like someone who's seen things fall apart. I had I sent him a message. Subject: clarification request. IP attribution. Short, professional, just enough to raise an eyebrow without triggering a defensive forward to legal. Hi Kenneth. Hope this finds you well. There's a minor ambiguity in Apex Precision's IP documentation regarding foundational contributions. Before your team finalizes the Series B package, I'd like to provide clarification. Happy to do a quick sync if helpful. I knew the moment I sent it, he'd bite. These guys don't like surprises, especially not the kind that carry filing numbers and footnotes. Within 3 hours, his assistant replied, Kenneth has 45 minutes free Friday at 2:30 p.m. Will that work? Oh, it would work just fine. The next day, I sat on my porch with a fresh copy of the patent filing in my lap, watching the leaves shift in the wind like they were plotting something. My inbox pinged again. Press release draft, leaked early. Apex Precision set to close $18 million Series B. Flagship product launch slated for Q1. Ethan's name was in it as Chief Innovation Officer. No mention of me. No hint of the years I spent building the foundation they were standing on. But I didn't feel rage this time. I felt ready. Because the fuse was lit, the dominoes were lined up, and Kenneth Hale wasn't just going to hear my side. He was going to see the folder, the filings, the contracts. The folder started as a joke, just a slim manila envelope I labeled in case of fire and shoved into my bag like it was nothing. But over the next few days, it thickened like a bruise. I spent my mornings in a quiet corner booth at Murphy's Diner, a place where the coffee tasted like regret and the Wi-Fi password was still password 123. Nobody asked questions there. The notary met me on a rainy Thursday. Mid-40s, smelled like peppermint and toner. Didn't ask why I needed half a dozen documents certified or why some of them included time-stamped screenshots of commit histories. She just checked my ID, clicked her little metal stamp, and slid everything back with a nod. Each page went into the folder like a brick being laid in a foundation no one else knew existed. First, the patent filing, stamped, signed, foundation of it all. Then the original blueprints, drawn by hand, scanned, and annotated in the margins with notes I hadn't looked at in years. QA fixes. Ethan doesn't get this. That one made me laugh. Next, the architecture diagrams, still in their original CAD files, watermarked with my initials and the old timestamp from before the Caldwells ever picked a company name. Then came the email exports, meeting notes where I'd flagged potential IP confusion and the passive-aggressive replies from leadership brushing me off with phrases like, "Not a priority this sprint." And finally, I printed a single page from an old startup legal guide. The clause was buried in Section 14. In the absence of a formal assignment agreement, intellectual property developed prior to incorporation remains the property of the individual creator. I highlighted it, folded it, slipped it into the very front of the folder like a bookmark soaked in gasoline. That evening, my phone buzzed. Subject: Q4 board meeting. Investor presentation. Location: 16th floor conference room. Time: Friday 3:00 p.m. Organizer: Kenneth Hale's assistant. No explanation, no CCs, no agenda attached. They didn't invite me. Of course not. I wasn't supposed to be in the room. That calendar event was a leak. Quiet, deliberate. A hint. They were going to show off the product. Try to seal the $18 million deal. Use my work, my code, my diagrams, my architecture as props in a theater of deception. And Kenneth? He'd seen just enough to know something didn't smell right. He wanted me to walk in. Not to talk to detonate. The elevator ride to the 16th floor was silent, save for the soft hum of overhead lights and the low static buzz of my own pulse that I could feel the weight of the folder pressing against my palm like a living thing. Not fear. Not even anger anymore. Just gravity. The kind that settles in your bones when you know, without question, that you're holding the end of someone else's fantasy. The conference room was already open. They were mid-presentation, voices elevated in that strained, cheerful cadence people use when they're pretending to believe their own pitch. Ethan stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled, sneakers gleaming, voice cracking slightly as he said something about leveraging automation efficiency at scale. A screen behind him showed my interface, live demo, complete with the startup animation I designed on a Sunday in 2021 after skipping football to debug a sensor calibration issue. Nobody noticed me at first. I slipped in and stood quietly by the glass wall, watched them dance. Kenneth Hale sat 3 seats from the head, pen resting on his notepad, unreadable expression frozen into place. Then Richard saw me. The CEO's brow tightened like a drawstring garbage bag. His mouth twitched into a smile so sharp you could have shaved his ego with it. Well, he said, loud enough to draw attention. Surprised to see you here, Frank. Missed the spotlight already? I stepped forward, calm, slow, folder in hand. I thought the investors might want this, I said, simply placing the manila folder directly in front of Kenneth. Richard scoffed. We're in the middle of something, Frank. I know, I replied. So is this. Ethan looked confused, which wasn't unusual, but now it was contagious. A few of the other board members leaned forward, eyeing the folder like it might start ticking. Kenneth didn't say a word. He just opened it. The first thing he saw was the clause, Section 14, highlighted in fluorescent yellow. Then came the blueprints, the diagrams, the time-stamped emails, the licensing agreement, the notarized filing, the signature, the patent number. With each page, his face cooled another degree, not in shock, but in recognition in inevitability. That I stood still, hands clasped in front of me, unmoving. Richard leaned toward Kenneth, trying to read upside down. What is that? Kenneth finally spoke, voice quiet but razor-edged. You don't own this technology. A beat passed. Then who did you just fire? Nobody breathed. Ethan's lips parted like he was about to ask a question, then closed again. His hand, I noticed, had started to shake. Richard said my name. Sharper this time. Frank. But I was already turning. No need to finish, I said over my shoulder. The folder does it for me. And then I walked out, footsteps echoing softly against the hardwood, while behind me the room erupted. Not into shouts, not yet, but into scrambling, whispered curses, paper rustling like panic wearing a tie. That I didn't look back, didn't need to, because 3 months later, Kenneth Hale's firm pulled out of the Series B. 2 weeks after that. The other investors followed. Ethan's LinkedIn now lists him as seeking new opportunities. Richard had to lay off half the engineering team to keep the lights on. And me? I'm consulting now. Funny thing about owning the patent to a revolutionary manufacturing system. Turns out a lot of companies want to license it, for the right price, of course. Thanks for listening, friends. If this story reminded you that experience still counts, that the quiet ones can still win, hit that subscribe button. It keeps these real tales coming. And believe me, there's plenty more where this came from. Take care out there, and remember, experience always has a seat at the table, even if they forget to pull out the chair.